Have you ever found yourself stuck in this loop? You feel that spark, you're inspired, excited, ready to dive in. You open Blender, full of energy, fingers hovering over the keyboard, but then you freeze. Wait, how do I even start this? So, like many people do, you head over to YouTube and start typing how to model in Blender, how to create this, how do I make that? It makes sense, right? You watch the video, see the final result up front, and instantly know what you're working toward. You hit play, open Blender, and slip into copy mode. Play, pause, switch to Blender, repeat again and again. Step by step, you follow along, no guesswork, no confusion. This way, you save time. Someone else has already done the hard part, the trial and error, so you don't have to. It's quick, it's smooth, it works. But here's the question that could change everything. Until when? This is a crucial question. If you answer it honestly and take a firm decision, I promise you'll escape the endless cycle of watching tutorials much faster. Why? Because while it's a solid way to start, it's not how you grow. At some point, you need to break free from this habit. Think about it. On YouTube alone, there are hundreds of videos showing how to model a chair, for example. Each creator uses a different approach, and no two results are exactly the same. Some meshes might be simpler, others more complex. But here's the truth. There's no single perfect or 100% correct method. And that's the beauty of it. There's no single right way. That's why you need to trust yourself, take the leap, and start projects on your own. You don't always need to someone tell you exactly how to build the object in your mind. Start, face challenges, and get stuck sometimes. That's where real learning happens. Over time, your unique workflow will emerge, shaped by your own experiences, and someone else might achieve the same result using a completely different method. The real skill, it's not memorizing steps. It's learning to make decisions on your own, to think like an artist, to trust your gut and experiment. That's when you stop being a follower and start becoming a creator. Nothing bad will happen if you make a mistake. Your computer won't explode. No disaster will strike. Now picture this. You land your first job, first day on the team, you sit down, open Blender, and what? Search YouTube for how to create a cube in Blender. Sounds ridiculous, right? But if all your experience comes from step-by-step tutorials, this could be your reality. So, what's the solution? Simple. Trust yourself and start before you're ready. There is no perfect moment. Technology keeps evolving and new tools and techniques emerge every day. No matter how hard we try, we'll always be a few steps behind. You'll never catch up if you wait until you know everything. So just start right now with what you've got. Introduce yourself to the world as soon as possible. Show people who you are, what skills you have, and what services you can offer. Turn your skills into a real business so you can sustain yourself and keep doing what you love. If you remember, I showed you this exact mindset in Season 1, the secret behind Pixar and Disney's success. They knew there were countless things they didn't know and that their work could always improve, but they didn't wait for some magical moment to start. Imagine if Pixar and Disney had said, "No, we're not ready yet, we need to learn more." What if they had waited until they reached the quality of Toy Story 4 before even releasing Toy Story 1? Well, that would have taken 24 years. Can you imagine waiting 2.5 decades to get started? Of course not. That wouldn't make any sense. Same goes for creators like Andrew Price. Many of you probably know him. With millions of subscribers and years of experience, he still discovers new things in Blender. In one of his recent short videos, uploaded November 2024, he discovers a feature in Blender that's been there for years.
This is a hidden feature, is as you go to change a value, if you hold down Alt and then move the value, all of the objects that have a bevel will now have that value altered.
Did he panic? No. He shared his discovery openly, proving that even experts don't know everything. He didn't wait to become a master. He became one by starting. And now it's your turn. No more waiting, no more overthinking. This episode is your challenge and a turning point. We're wrapping up Season 2 of BlenderStory, and we're doing it differently this time. I won't walk you through every click and step. Instead, we'll jump into creating materials for 5 models you've already built. The wall shelf, dresser, Andy's desk, Molly's bed, and Andy's bed. No hand-holding, no step-by-step walkthrough. Just sharp, powerful tips for each asset, and the rest is all you. This is where you stop following and start owning it. You're not just learning anymore, you're doing. Okay? Time to flex your skills and say, "Right, Blender, let's dance." And hey, if you hit a roadblock, our free Discord community is there for you. Links in the description. You're not alone. So, ready to prove how far you've come? Download the free practice files below, fire up Blender, and let's make some magic. Alright, let's jump into the first model for this episode, the wall shelf. Now, we've already talked a lot about UV unwrapping objects throughout this season. So if you're not sure how UV unwrapping works, make sure you've watched this playlist, especially the earlier episodes. Okay, so I've already UV unwrapped this model ahead of time, so it's fully ready for adding materials now. I move my mouse to this corner, click and drag to split the viewport into two parts. Then I switch this part to the shader editor. The material we're about to create is super simple. We've worked with wood materials several times already in this season. So let's quickly create a wood material for this shelf. I'll switch to Material Preview, create a new material for my object, and name it something like Wood _ Wall Shelf. Okay? I press Shift-A and add a noise texture. Then I hold Ctrl-Shift and click on it to connect it directly to the surface. Just a quick reminder, for the shortcut to work, you need to enable Node Wrangler first. Go to Edit, then Preferences, and under the Add-ons tab, turn on Node Wrangler. Okay? Next, I'll select the noise texture, press Ctrl-T to automatically add the mapping and texture coordinate nodes, and connect the UV output to the vector input. I'll slide these nodes a bit to the side, then press Shift-D to duplicate the noise texture and place it here. Now, all that's left is tweaking the values of these properties until we get the result we want. I'll tell you the values I'm using here, but promise me this, you'll try your own numbers too, okay? Because the UV layout you did on your object might be different from mine. So if you copy my values exactly, your result might not look the same. Alright, first I hold Shift and lower the Y scale in the mapping node to 0.03. For this noise texture, I'll set the scale to 3.5. Detail to 5, roughness to 1, and linearity to 10. Now let's go to the second noise texture. I set the scale to 20 and roughness to 1. That's it. Now we need to connect the map we've created to the normal input of the principled BSDF shader. So I add a bump node. I plug the factor output from the noise texture into the height input of the bump, and the normal output from the bump into the normal input of the principled BSDF. With Ctrl-Shift-Click, I'll connect the shader to the surface. Okay, you can see that the bump effect is a bit too strong. So I lower the strength in the bump node to 0.1. Much better. This looks fine for now. We don't want it to be too intense. Now, I change the color of the object to something like this. Alright, now I click and drag to apply this material to this part of the object as well. Okay, that's done. Now let's go to the render properties and switch the render engine to Cyclus. Okay, I also switched the device to GPU compute to make the render faster. Then I go into render display mode. Here I turn off these two options and choose this HDRI image for lighting. I also adjust the rotation of the HDRI just a bit so we can see the reflections on the surface more clearly. Alright, this is the result so far. Now let's tweak the material's reflection settings too. To do that, I first connect this noise texture to the roughness input, then I add a color ramp and drop it here. Now I move this color stop to the left a bit, and that helps adjust the roughness, just like that. Super simple. Now to add even more detail, we can use a height map texture from the practice files I provided. We'll convert it into normal data and combine it with the normal map we've already created. Let's do this quickly. I'll drag the texture into the shader editor, hold Ctrl-Shift and click on it. And since this is a grayish skull texture, I'll change the color space to non-color. Next, I'll press Ctrl-T to automatically add the mapping nodes. Now I press Shift-D to duplicate this bump node and connect the color output of the texture to the height input of this new bump. Then I connect the normal output of this bump node to the normal input of this one. Let me rearrange these nodes a bit to make more space. Okay, perfect. Finally, I take the normal output from this node and plug it into the normal input of the principled BSDF. And with Ctrl-Shift-Click, I'll connect the shader to the surface. So here's what we did. We converted the grayscale image into normal data using a bump node, combined it with our existing normal map, and connected the result to the shader. And you can already see this added some really cool detail to the surface. The effect is a bit strong though, so I'll lower the strength to 0.85. Nice. That looks much better. Now, if you want to take it one step further, make it feel even more real, you can use a super powerful node called ambient occlusion. So, I add the ambient occlusion node, then I move my cursor over the color here, press Ctrl-C to copy, Then move here and hit Ctrl V to paste. Now I connect the output to the base color. Okay, let's see what it does. I switch to render display mode, and as you can see, this node darkens the areas where two parts of the object are touching, like right here. It mimics what really happens in the real world. Those tight corners and overlaps don't get much light, so they naturally appear darker. That's what ambient occlusion does. It fakes that effect. Alright, that's it for the wall shelf. Now let's move on to the next model, the dresser. After creating the material for the wall shelf, making materials for the remaining objects is super easy. All we need to do is append the material we just made, and by tweaking a few settings, we can quickly get the result we want. So, I go to the File menu, click on Append, and bring in the material we made for the wall shelf. Now I select this object, switch to Material Preview, go to the Material Properties, and apply the appended material to it. Then, while holding Shift, I select the rest of the objects, and the last selection should be the object that already has the material on it. Now I press Ctrl L and choose Link Materials to assign that same material to all the selected objects. Cool. Now let's change the color first. Okay, this one is good. Then, in a bump node, I lower the strength to 0.05. Nice. Looks good. Let's switch over to Render Display so we can get a better view. I scroll down here, open the Viewport Shading panel, turn off these two options, and choose this HDRI image. Alright, now I rotate the HDRI a bit. Yes, this looks good. Now, for the inside parts of the drawers, I went ahead and selected all the inner faces first. Then, I added a new material slot, chose the same material again, clicked on this number here to make it a unique copy, and renamed it to Wood Inside. I also changed the color to something like this, and in Edit mode, I clicked Assign to apply this new material to the selected faces. Then I repeated this process for each drawer one by one, adding a material slot, choosing the material, and assigning it to the selected faces. Alright, now let's move on to the material for the drawer knobs. I'll create a new material for it and name it Knob Matte. Then I add an ambient occlusion node and connect it to the base color. I pick a color like this. Now for the roughness, I've included the texture in the practice files, so I drag that into the shader editor. I place it here, then press Ctrl T to add the mapping nodes. Since it's a grayscale image, I change the color space to non-color, and finally connect it to the roughness input. Next, I Ctrl-Shift-click on the texture and adjust the scale in the mapping node to get the right texture size. Alright. Now again, Ctrl-Shift-click to plug the shader back into surface. Okay, next I add a color ramp, drop it here, and pull this color stop to the side to fine-tune the roughness value. And for a more natural result, I can add a bump node and connect it to the normal input as well to add a subtle surface detail. Okay, I lower the strength. And that's it for this object. Alright, now let's move on to the next model, Andy's desk. For this object, I followed the exact same steps as before. First, I appended the wood material we created for the wall shelf and applied it to this object. Then, I simply changed its color. Next, I brought in the same texture we used earlier to add scratches to the knob. I combined it with a normal map I already had using a bump node, and then connected the result to the normal input of the shader. And here's how it looks now. Finally, I adjusted the strength to get the exact result I wanted. Then, I moved on to this object, applied the same material, clicked this number to make it a single user copy, renamed it to wood_red, and changed the color to red. After that, I selected all the objects that should use this material and assigned it to them as well. For the drawer handle, I reused the same knob material we made earlier for the dresser, changed the color, and then used color ramp to tweak the roughness. Then I assigned it to the rest of the drawer handles. For the inside of the drawers, since we modeled them as separate mesh objects, it was super easy. I just selected them and applied the same material we used for the desk surface. And that's it for Andy's desk materials. Looking super nice and clean. Alright, let's move on to the next one, Molly's bed. For the wooden parts of the bed, I used the same material we made for Andy's desk. I appended the material, applied it to this object, renamed it properly, and picked a color like this. Then I selected all the objects that needed this material and assigned it to them. Next, I selected this object, added a new material slot, chose the same material, clicked this number to make it a unique copy, and renamed it to wood pink. I changed the color to pink and assigned it to all the relevant objects. After that, I added another material slot, made it a single user copy again, named it wood blue, changed its color to blue, and assigned it to these objects. Just that easy. Then, I slightly reduced the bump strength on both of textures we had added, just to make the effect more subtle. Finally, I adjusted the roughness a bit to make the wood material a little shinier. Alright, that wraps up the wooden parts of Molly's bed. After that, I moved on to the mattress material. I created a new material for it and gave it a proper name. Then I imported this texture, which is also included in the practice files, into the shader editor, connected it into the base color, and pressed Ctrl-T to add the mapping nodes. I also added an ambient occlusion node here to make the result look more natural. Then I changed the scale to 3, so the texture would display at the correct size on the object. Okay, for the fabric texture of the mattress, I added a magic texture, set the scale to 1500, and used Ctrl-T to add the mapping nodes. Then I connected UV to the vector input. Finally, I added a bump node, connected the texture output to height, and plugged the normal output into the shader's normal input. Then I reduced the strength on the bump node. Alright, that's the result so far. For the metal parts of the wheels, I appended the material we used for the toy box hinges and assigned it to these objects. Then, for the last object, I appended the knob material we created earlier, assigned it, and simply changed its color. Now, the only thing left is to apply this design on this part of the object. And that's actually the main challenge in this episode. To create a design like this, we need to explore a new feature in Blender: Texture Paint. Texture Paint in Blender is very powerful and also a big topic on its own. So, in this section, we're not going deep into all the details. I'll just give you a basic introduction, enough to help us complete the task for this object. We'll definitely talk about Texture Paint more thoroughly on this channel later. So, if you've never used it before, it might feel a bit challenging at first. And that's totally normal. Many others have left the same way. So, don't worry at all. And if you get stuck, don't forget to check the Discord channel. So far in this course, we've gotten to know Object Mode, Edit Mode, and Sculpt Mode. Now let me give you a very basic introduction to Texture Paint Mode. After selecting Texture Paint Mode from here, you'll see a circle appear around your mouse cursor. That's simply our brush, and we can use it to paint directly on the object. But as you can see, when I click and drag, nothing really happens. And that's totally expected, because we haven't created a texture yet. Without a texture, there's nothing for the paint to be saved on. So before we start painting, we need to create a texture. Since we want to paint on this object, I first switch to Object Mode, select the object, then press Ctrl-Tab to open the Pie menu, a quick way to switch between all of Blender's modes. Now, I choose Texture Paint Mode. In the shader editor, you see the material of the selected object. Here, I add an image texture node, click on New, and name the texture something like Ornament. Then, I multiply the width and height by 4 to get a higher resolution. Okay, we don't need to change the color now. We can do that later. Leave the generated type set to blank, and click New Image. Now, back in Texture Paint Mode, when I click here, I should be able to see the new texture we just created in the list. But instead, I only see the old textures already linked to this material, and not the new one. That's because the list hasn't updated yet. To update this list, switch the mode to Single Image, then switch it back to Material, and now the new texture shows up in the list. Great, just select it. But again, if I try painting now, still nothing. That's also expected, because the new texture we made isn't connected to any socket yet. So Blender doesn't know where to display it. Let's fix that. I connect the texture to the base color, and immediately you see everything turns black. That's because the default color of the texture we created was black. So now all the objects using this material are showing up as black. Now, if I click and drag again, you'll still see nothing really happens. And that's because the current brush color, as you can see here, is black. So we can't actually see it making any changes. But if I hold Ctrl and then click and drag, you'll notice I can now easily paint with white. Basically, when you hold Ctrl, Blender uses this second color you see here. And when you just left click, it uses the first color. Alright, now we want to bring this entire object back to the original color we used earlier for ambient occlusion. So what I can do is hover my mouse over this color, press Ctrl C to copy it, then come here and press Ctrl V to paste it in this color box and I start painting it manually. But that doesn't really sound practical, right? It could take a lot of time. That's why Blender gives us this tool here called Fill. As the name suggests, if I select it and click on the object, it fills the surface with the color we've chosen. But you'll notice if I try clicking on the other objects, nothing happens. That's because these objects are separate. So we need to select them one by one in object mode, then go back to texture paint mode and use the fill tool again for each one. Again, that doesn't sound like a smart workflow. So what's better? Let's delete the texture we created, then copy this color with Ctrl C and create a new texture from scratch. This time, we'll paste the color right here when we're setting up the texture. So it's already using the correct base color from the start. That way, we won't have to fill every object manually later. Next, I need to select the texture from this list here, but you'll see it's not showing up yet. So just like before, I'll switch between these two modes real quick to refresh the list. And now the texture we made shows up. Perfect. I'll select it. And now everything's ready to load the image we want into the brush. To do that, I select the brush tool from here. Then I click on the texture properties here. You haven't been to this section yet, right? Okay. Now simply click on New, then click on Open, and double click on this PNG image. It's the one I also included in the practice files for you. Okay? You'll see the image gets loaded here. Now if I click once here, the image we selected turns into a brush stamp. Cool. Now I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that. And just like in sculpt mode, if I press F and move my mouse, I can simply change the brush size. I'll make it bigger and click to confirm, then click again. And you'll see the image now shows up larger. But here's an important tip. Make sure here the color is set to pure white. That means the saturation should be 0 and the value should be 1. This way the image appears exactly as it is. If, for example, I pick a darker color and then click, you'll notice the image we used for the brush also becomes dark. So make sure to choose pure white here. Alright, now if you take a closer look at the design on the object, you'll see the edges aren't sharp. It looks a bit faded. That's because of the brush settings. If you select the brush from here, you can access its settings either from up here or by opening the Tool Properties tab on this side. This Tool Properties section basically shows the setting for whatever tool you've selected. And yeah, you can see there are a lot of settings for the brush. We're not going to dive deep into them just yet. For now, just scroll to the Fall-Off section, click here, and choose Constant. Okay, now when I click again, you'll see the edges of the design stay sharp, not faded anymore. Alright, now if you take a look at the backside of this object, you'll notice that the design we painted didn't show up on the back surface. To make sure the brush also paints on the backside of the object, go back to the Tool Settings, scroll down to the Options section, and simply turn off both Occlude and Backface culling. Cool. Now switch to the front view, press F, adjust the brush size, and click. Then if I switch to Perspective View, you'll see the design is now applied to both the front and back surface of the object. Alright, now if I want to paint this same design onto the next object, I first need to go back to Object mode, select this object, and then switch back to Texture Paint mode. Now you can paint on this object too. I'll press Ctrl 1 to go to the back view, and click. And there we go. That's the result. Now I'll go back to Object mode, and finally connect the texture we just worked on to the Ambient Occlusion color input, and connect the Ambient Occlusion node to the base color as well. And done. But here's a very important note. If you press Ctrl S to save your Blender project like usual, it will save the .blend file, but it won't save the texture we just painted, the one with the ornament brush design. So when you try to close Blender, you'll get a warning asking, do you want to save the image you worked on before creating? And you definitely need to pay attention here. Just make sure to save it. Actually, let me show you a safer way to handle it. Once you're done with your texture painting, from here, go to the image editor, click here, and select the image you painted on. You see that based on the UV layout I set up for this object, the brush strokes appear nicely on the texture. And if you look closely, you'll see a little asterisk icon next to the image menu here. That means the image hasn't been saved yet. So make sure to go to the image menu and click Save. Then Blender asks you where to save it. I'll save it in the same folder as the other textures for this project. Now, if you open the Textures folder, you'll see the new image file right there with the rest. Alright, that wraps up this object. Now let's move on to the last object, Andy's bed. For the wooden parts of the bed, I appended the wood material we created for the chair model back in episode 9 of this season. Then, I assigned it to all the wooden parts of the bed and also renamed the material. After that, I slightly reduced the scale on the y-axis to stretch out the wood grain a bit more. Next, I moved on to the material color and adjusted the color stops in the color ramp node to tweak the tones. Then, I added an ambient occlusion node here to make the shadows look more natural. After that, I added a hue and saturation node, and by lowering the value to 0.8, I made the overall wood color a little darker. Then, I added imperfections and scratches textures, set their color space to non-color, used Ctrl-T to add mapping nodes, and connected the mapping vector output to both textures. Just like we did for the wooden materials in previous objects, I combined the textures, connected them to bump node, and adjusted the bump strength to get the surface details right. Okay, to make everything look even more realistic, I turned the coat value all the way up, and for the coat roughness, I added a noise texture. I connected it to the coat roughness input, set the scale to 1, and cranked both the detail and roughness all the way up. To control the contrast, I added a color ramp between them and adjusted the color stops to fine-tune the roughness look. And that's it for the wood material of the bed. Now, for the blanket material, I appended the fabric material we made for Molly's bed. I renamed the material, clicked here, and swapped in this new texture instead. In the mapping node, I changed the scale to 1 and rotated it -90 degrees on the z-axis. And that's it. After that, I brought the normal map for this material into the shader editor. Then, I connected the mapping node's vector output to it. Now, we need to combine this texture with the previous normal map we were using for the fabric surface. Okay, so first, I changed its color space to non-color, and now, if I connect it directly to the normal input on the bump node and switch to render display, you notice this weird artifacts showing up. That's because we need a middle node to process this normal map properly. Super simple fix. I press Shift-A, type normal map, and drop it in right here. Now if you look at the object, you'll see it's working correctly and that glitch is gone. Okay, we can see that by adding this new normal map, we've got some really nice extra surface detail that makes the material look a lot more interesting. And that's it for that part. Finally, I set the roughness of the material to 0.85. Now for the underside of the blanket, I create a new material slot, select the same material again, click this little number to unlink it from the original one, rename it, and then delete these nodes that were part of the original material setup. Okay, I also delete these ones. Alright, now I switch to edit mode, and I need to select the faces under the blanket. To do that, I'll use the UV editor for help. Yes, UV editor. Temporarily, I change this panel to the UV editor, enable sync selection from here. Then in the viewport, I select one face from the bottom of the blanket so I can figure out which UV island it belongs to. Then I move my mouse over here, press L, and it selects the entire island. Now I hold Alt-Shift and click here to select these faces as well. Okay, then I pick the new material and hit Assign. That's done. And now I simply click and drag this same material onto this object as well. Okay, for the pillow material, I create a new material slot. Then I select the material I had just made for the underside of the blanket. Next, I click here to make a duplicate. I rename it properly. Okay, I import the pillow's texture into the shader editor, connect it to the ambient occlusion node, Press Ctrl-T to add the mapping nodes, then rotate the texture 90 degrees on the Z-axis. Okay, while holding Shift, I also tweak the Y-axis so that the texture fits nicely on the object. And that's it, guys. Finally, the material for our last object is done. We've officially reached the end of another season of BlenderStory. And once again, we've proved to ourselves that when we start something, we stick with it all the way to the end. Huge congratulations to you for sticking with it and completing this season. I truly hope you've enjoyed the journey as much as I have. If this course has helped you grow or inspired you in any way, don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment. Your support means the world to me. And if you're able to go a step further, you can find the Gumroad link in the description. Every bit of support helps fuel the next season of this journey. Okay, we're taking a short break, but I'll see you soon in the next season. Until then, I'm wishing you all the success in the world. Take care and keep creating.